From the Cyber Hub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the Cyber Hub podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Happy Friday, Mr. Foulon. What's happening, buddy?
What up, what up? Just another Friday.
You know, I need to make a new intro for this show. I'm going to do that this weekend. It's just going to be pictures of you and me everywhere. That's how I think it's going
to Self-confident much?
I like looking at myself before the show starts. I'm kidding. I know. But welcome, everyone, to the Friday conversation between two CISOs. Christophe Foulon, for those who don't know, you've written one or two books now. Christophe.
2 books, co-author, helped contribute to another, understanding and measuring cyber risk, and Shadow helped with a couple others. So wrote a couple of books.
Yeah, you've wrote a couple of books. You've been around. So for everyone tuning in today, we're talking zero trust. Yep. Zero trust. And this was your idea. Why zero trust, Christophe?
Oh, great question. I was helping a customer earlier this week, and they wanted to implement a zero trust solution. And when I asked them, like, what was their goal with zero trust, and it really came down to, it was a buzzword that they were told that they need to do, and that they were trying to get to achieving that. And when I asked them if they really understood the effort that was involved in truly developing a true zero trust solution, I don't think they were really prepared. Like, it was a buzzword that they were sold on, that they were told that, oh yeah, this cloud tool can help automatically create segmentation for you and make your environment zero trust compatible. What's zero trust compatible even mean?
Zero trust compatible is a new term invented by a marketing person that Danny and Chris, had they heard that, would probably be just shaking their heads disgustingly at this point. You know, having said that, most people don't understand the zero trust journey. You're absolutely right. They see something from NIST, from the government, from some sort of regulatory body says you should aim for zero trust without fully comprehending what that actually means.
Well, let's try to break it out for folks.
Let's do it.
The 3 foundational elements of a zero trust journey. I'll call it a journey because it's not like a project. It never ends. It's more like a program. It's more like your security journey in truth. And if you've listened to the audiobooks, Unicorn Project and others, there's a similar book that was created for zero trust. And the name of the book is off my head right now, but I will find it out and I'll share it with the rest of the community. But I met the author, George Finney, at a event out in Vegas.
Yeah, I did a podcast with George on his new book.
So
yeah, the zero trust. Yeah.
So that's a great book for understanding the journey in the form of a story. But today we'll kind of go through the different elements.
Project Zero Trust is the name of the book.
Project Zero Trust. Thank you for finding that. The first element is all entities are untrusted by default. And that includes me and you within the environment. That includes all your user identities, all your machine identities, all your compute identities, all your resource identities. Nothing is to be trusted in your environment because any one of those identities could be compromised by a threat actor and used to lever- leverage themselves and navigate within the environment. Second, since you don't trust anything, you use least privilege. If you were to assign credentials to one of these identities, you give it the least amount of privilege for it to be able to function. And essentially, that means never trust, always verify. So you don't trust it, but you have to use it. So verify that it really is what it says it is, that it's your own resource in your own network, um, doing your jobs.
Right.
And the last fundamental element is assume breach. You want to assume that a threat actor is living and breathing in your environment, and therefore, by not trusting anyone and assigning least privilege, you minimize the potential for a threat actor to live on the land, find resources, and weasel their way into your trust structure.
Right.
Now, before we go on to the 7 pillars, just on those 3 foundational elements, James, how would we rate most businesses on meeting all 3 of those?
Yeah. I'm not gonna say it's impossible to meet him, but it's, you're talking about a journey that, is really, I'm not gonna say poor, because I feel like that's being too critical, but poor.
Yeah, I'd give most organizations a C or a D, if not an F when it comes to this. Your small, medium-sized companies are definitely starting at an F because they usually trust everything, and least privilege seems like a 4-letter word for them. they,
Well,
they
it's
need to function quickly, right?
well,
They need to get things spun up.
so I think we as security practitioners, because we're so addicted to enterprise level security, because enterprise level security is where all the cool stuff happens. So we look at small and mid-sized companies, the 20, 30 mom pop shop type of organizations, accounting firm, a law office, a doctor's office, regional facilities, you name it, whatever it is. I'd say up to 50 employees where everyone knows everyone, right? Where, Kathy knows Bob and Bob knows Kathy, and so forth. I wouldn't say that they trust everyone. I would say they work under the assumption that they're not a target. And they do that because guess what? If you're not in cybersecurity and you're just going about your daily life, you probably don't think you are a target. And that's not a bad thing. I kind of like people being naive. We have to deal with it. We chose a career in security. We chose a place to be at. These people, they just want to run their business and go home. Now, where does the fault lie in that scenario? To me, would be whoever sets up their IT, right? So if you're a local IT provider in a town where you're working with these organizations, then the responsibility of that falls on your shoulders.
True. Are most IT service providers on that security journey where they assign least privilege and
But
thing
do you need it?
concepts like these? Yes, you do. I
Do you
think you
need
do.
it in a business of 30 people? Do you need it? Or are we
Yes.
just complicating things for
Why
business?
why do you need 5 global administrators in a company size of 5 within your Microsoft tenant?
Great question, because no one can agree who's in charge when it's a 5-person company in a Microsoft tenant. The other part is one person does X, another person does Y, And you know what? This is going to be a knock on Microsoft, and I'm sorry for all the Microsoft listeners and viewers. And everyone knows I'm someone who was a detractor of Microsoft early on. I'm now a fan, and believe in what they do. But their back office for small business sucks. No one understands what roles to assign. There's no guidebook for roles there. There's a whole bunch of roles. Hell, 95% of security practitioners, if I took them right now into the role assignment piece in Azure Active Directory, or what do they call it now? Entra ID, right? Wouldn't let me know what this role does. Couldn't do it. So how do we expect the business of 5 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 people to do that?
Not to knock on AWS, they're not any better. Salesforce isn't any better. Like, these large companies that small, medium-sized businesses use as a foundation for building their business often are created with enterprises in mind, and therefore never have the back office for a small, medium-sized company. So in addition to that IT provider, maybe they do need that managed security service provider just to come in and help them with their security foundations. Um, and it could be a once a year assessment to say, hey, that this is where you are, this is where you should be growing to over the next year, and let that be the journey that they implement on a slower pace than an enterprise might, but working towards it gradually as their business grows. One of the connections in my network wrote a book called Startup Secure. And the idea behind it is you implement safe solutions as you grow your organization. Um, you implement MFA as soon as you can. You create a separate user that is your global administrator that has a separate license for that, but then doesn't interact with the rest of the business. And then that way, you can separate your administrative duties from your regular duties. And for a small shop, that extra license might cost a little more, but it's worth it if it's set up right from the beginning, because it creates that culture where maybe breach isn't assumed, but there's at least, hey, we need to do these little steps to secure our environment as we grow, and security becomes part of that culture as we grow.
So I agree with that. I think our obsession with security is a good one. Our obsession towards startup, or I wouldn't say startup, because I think startups are very, very different. And depending on the startup, security is almost now always baked into the conversation, right? We see startups actually hire security engineers or virtual CISOs very, very early on, earlier than ever before, irregardless to what they do, whether it be, AI now or anything else. Like, as you and I are talking, I see a thing that pops up, says Nvidia is now worth $2 trillion. That's their market cap because of the AI frenzy, as one would call it. I mean, we have this obsession towards these small, mid-sized businesses, and I think that, when it comes to security, and it's a worthy one. But when we talk about zero trust, I think you look at those organizations, and it goes against every fiber of their beings as a small business. As someone who's ran small businesses, right? Like, the whole point of running a small company is you don't want to be corporate, you don't want to have badges, you want to smile at every person who walks through the door or calls your phone. You want to be kind to everyone who comes in, and um, and that's zero trust. Kind of comes off as saying I shouldn't trust you. I think what we need to do is encourage people to question things without putting it in. I've always said zero trust, a great idea, horrible marketing, right?
Yes.
Horrible marketing. Um, you know, we should have a different name for it.
I think we should have a different name for it, but um, I think like George takes it and makes it a more digestible topic. So let me share the link for his book since you shared the link for the other book.
I've shared the podcast for George and the links in the notes of the podcast too.
Okay, perfect.
So
So
Project Zero Trust is great.
yeah, great book, easily digestible by non-techies to see how they could go along this journey. But we're at 17 minutes, so I want to be cognizant of time. The next aspect of zero trust outside of the three foundational elements is the 7 pillars: users, devices, network environments, application and workloads, data, automation and orchestration, and visibility and analytics.
Right.
Now, most companies focus on user devices, networks, maybe application.
And data.
Some of them have gotten to the point where they know where their data is, they know how to label their data, but they haven't gotten to the point where they can put good control around who can access the data and what controls are around the data leaving the environment. A lot of companies still haven't gone through their full data governance journey and implemented a really well designed DLP. Like the DLPs that people are still using are archaic regex convulsions that they've put together to look for social security numbers or just fixed patterns within those documents. And while that could help, it's not the end all be all for truly protecting your data and in this type of trust no one or verify everyone before giving access. Um, Automation and orchestration, I think a lot of people have been working on that, uh, at least the automation part. The orchestration part, I mean, SOAR have been around for 4 or 5 years now. I think they never truly developed the use cases that they were envisioned to do. They started with some smaller ones, but never fully matured to the level that at least I expected that they would. Um, and then the next pillar, visibility and analytics. A lot of folks do a lot of visibility and analytics. Are Is it the right things, right analytics that you're looking at? Are they getting the right logs for the right reasons? That one is a constant refinement process. So I don't want to ding folks too hard on that.
So I'm gonna come at you and say, first of all, you got to have the data, meaning you got to have visibility and you've got to have your analytics before you can start addressing user device, network environment, application, workload data, and automation and orchestration. And so these pillars, while they're great, I think there's a way and there's got to be a point where you go, all right, visibility. And the reason I say that is because one of my favorite books, and I feel like we're on a book tirade on this podcast today, is Roger Grimes' Data Driven Defense, Data Driven
Mhm.
Computer Defense. And he just released a new version of it. Roger, I think 19 or 20 books at this point that he's released over the last 10-15 years. I mean, the man is just a knowledge machine. I've had him on the show a bunch of times. I've had private conversations with him a whole lot of times, and I love Roger, right? But I don't think you can start to address zero trust without having visibility. You got to know what you're going after, and you've got to have that layout. And once you've got that layout, then you can start to say, all right, these are all of my users, and I have visibility into all of my users. I've got visibility into all of my devices, and now I know user equals device. Now I got to look at user device to network to environment. Then I got to look at user device network to application to workload. What do they need to be? Then I've got to look at that towards data access and what kind of data do they need? And then I look at how do I automate and orchestrate all that data into a single pane of glass that allows my security operations team and my GRC team to properly govern and manage the security risks as they arise. The big thing that we never talk about in zero trust, but I think is often misguided because people say, well, it's not part of zero trust or it's a subsector of zero trust, is vulnerabilities and patching. Vulnerabilities and patching apply at every single one of these levels, and it's probably the top priority of anything to do with zero trust. You got to get a patch, you got to validate it, and you got to put it out. If you don't do that, then nothing that you do in zero trust matters at all at that point, because all you've done is you've put in a framework no different than the CIS top 20 or a MITRE type of framework or even NIST. You've done the zero trust buzzword, but you haven't done anything like that either.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that comes into the continuous monitoring and continuous adjustment that is needed for a good zero trust implementation. Is that visibility, analytics, that orchestration, um, and automation. The automation should be triggered by the patches that are released, and then you work through the orchestration of patching your systems, at least in your test dev environment first, making sure that they don't break anything, making sure that everything still functions before you release the prod. Um, but I think like if you go through the journey of um, how Project Zero Trust was done, they started with application. Then they went to which users, devices, and network environment should this application function under? And then what can we do to secure that application in the network plane, in the application plane, and then in the continuous monitoring and visibility plane? And that's another great approach.
I agree. Now let's take that approach to a small business. Fair, because we kind of went on that tirade for a second.
Mhm.
That approach to a small business is typically everyone wears multiple hats because they're a small company,
Mhm.
right? So user permissions can no longer be defined by role. Rather, user permissions are likely defined by what do you know what to do, and can you help me get it done, right? And so at that very moment, you're really looking at applications and you go, well, applications have to be open to almost everyone. Maybe these three people don't need access to all these applications, but everyone else does. And the reason they do is because they need to do work. And again, I think the biggest point with small businesses is they never really define roles because everyone does everything. And that goes contrary to everything we know to be an enterprise. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I mean, I've seen enterprises where you get considerably more access than you need because they've inherited legacy systems and they've never went back through to define roles, or they're so big that you end up needing access to way more systems just to get your job done because that's what they need. Um, but I think for a small business, the fact that you said these three people don't need access, that's a start, right? And then you
Right.
go, these four people don't need admin rights. And then these four people, um, they don't need the ability to look at logs or edit logs or maybe do any transactions, cash transactions or whatever. And then those little steps that you can take to scope out roles um, is their journey. It's not going to happen overnight. As they grow and people shift into more specialized roles, then they can start to refine that. But like you said, the expectation from the beginning is not that they do it perfect, but that they have it in mind that they just don't blanketly grant access to everyone.
Yeah, I completely agree that you shouldn't ever blanket access to anyone. At the same time, I think we as security practitioners are oftentimes blinded by the fact that we see security. That's all we see sometimes in our blinders, and sometimes we lack to see business. And I think that's the difference between like a one CISO to the other, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Um, we ought to see the business. And so whenever we're going about a zero trust implementation, we have to be able to see the business. What's that business look like? Who's engaged in that business? And then, you know, is there a way to limit business or not? And that's a one of those things where I feel like in smaller companies that's harder said than done, because in an enterprise it's clearly defined. This is the DevOps team. They have access to GitHub. They have access to, Synopsys. They've got access to all these different tools. They've got access to, AWS and whatnot, and all these different environments. It gets much harder in a smaller business. In fact, it's harder in smaller companies zero trust strategy is easier to implement in a larger org than it is in a smaller org.
That's true. I would say full implementation really is meant for a larger size organization. Um, but with the right mindset, you can work towards that consistently and continuously with a smaller organization. And I think if you have that security and safety culture in mind when you're young, it becomes part of your organization's DNA so that when you do grow, you keep that in mind.
Yeah, agreed. And as you grow, you're going to hire smarter people to help you manage the growth of the business. You want to make sure you hire smart people who are also going to address the security side of the business as well. I think that's going to be a critical part to all of that. We're about a minute in. Chris, any minute left? Any parting words for our audience this Friday on Zero Trust?
I would say your zero trust is a journey and not a project. So if this is something that you're truly interested in, feel free to reach out to James or myself for more advice, and we can help you or refer you to security partners that can help you with that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a resource. If you want to hear Chris and I, by the way, talk about any topic that's top of mind for y'all, just shoot us a DM on LinkedIn, or you can go to, the podcast website, cyberhubpodcast.com. Chris and I both are there and can actually see your requests come through. And we're happy to talk about anything. We're really are kind of two guys kind of talking about different topics, and Zero Trust deserves a whole lot more than 30 minutes. And we may do a part 2 and 3 to this, because I feel like we didn't really, we could dive into every single one of those pillars on its own for 30 minutes and talk about it in great detail. And maybe that's something we do if y'all want to get that. So go check out CPF Coaching, by the way. If you're not following Chris on Substack, make sure to do that as well. And those links will be in the comment section here, wherever you're watching us. So go do that. You can also subscribe to the podcast, my daily podcast, 9 a.m. Monday through Thursday, with all the latest, greatest news and action items that practitioners need to do. Chris and I are going to be doing this every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. We're going to start posting the topics beforehand and kind of creating an event around it, so we don't just pop on your stream. And we kind of decided to do this a few weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago. We were having, cookies. This was before I started my diet, and and drinks at a DC hotel. We're like, what should we do? And this was our idea. So go definitely let us know what you think, what you're looking for. We're happy to talk about anything and everything. Until then, thank you all for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Have a great rest of your day. And I think most importantly, stay cyber safe.
Stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.